All right, great. So next up we have Team Quantum, and the paper is titled Future of Mobility in Urban India, Crafting Commute Interventions and Solutions for 2030.
Awesome. Sorry, I'm just placing myself so I can see the time. Awesome. Great. Good morning still, everyone. I think we're right on time. Super thrilled to be here and to kind of walk you through what at this point has become sort of like a passion project. Not just of mine, but I think I speak for the entire team that worked on this. It got us super excited. We still talk about it. It's officially over. But let me kind of walk you through what we started with, and happy to take questions as well. We started out thinking, how do we uncover the future of commute in India, right? And what does it look like? And we had some basic guardrails. We're looking at urban India, we're looking at B2C, etc. But soon into the process, we realized it's not simply just looking at what the future of commute could be. It's a topic that impacts all of us. It's a topic that we deal with on a daily basis. So fairly early on, we kind of went back to the drawing board and said, listen, it's not simply understanding the future, but it's also what are the futures we want to bet on? What are the futures of commute we actually feel like, we want to drive, change that we want to be at the helm of. So along with us, as well as a super, super passionate client team that was involved in this, it soon became like a living, breathing, organism of its own, far beyond what just a project would be. I'm aware I'm still on the first slide, but I think the one thing that I still need to kind of double stress on, and why we're so particularly passionate about this project, is first, for me, and I think for some other members of the team as well, it was the first time we were working on something that was in the futuring space, and it was as extensive and comprehensive, and something that we were very passionate about, like I said. But also, and I was privy to some conversations in the coffee break room just a couple of minutes ago, it's something we all deal with on an everyday basis, right? We've all battled some Andheri traffic to reach Leela today. We deal with it when we're rushing to airports, etc. So it was something that became, yes, you're a researcher in the project, but you're also a key participant. You're designing for yourself as much as a consumer. And the fact that it was such a big part of our lived reality really made it, all the more personal for us, but also extremely important to kind of navigate and deal with. So that's really the intent with which we went ahead with this. I've spoken about some of this as well. Now, when we started the process, we realized there's multiple dilemmas for us to navigate right when we began. What is the future of commute? It sounds very articulate on paper and possibly, when I distilled it in these slides. But right at the first step, we were almost toying with the idea of, can there be multiple futures? Can they contradict each other? Which are there some that we feel a little more passionately about than others? And what do we do actually in terms of how do we differentiate fact versus foresight versus fiction? Because futuring, as much as it's a science, it's also an art, right? And there's a lot of speculation and risk involved. So those were some fairly interesting and complicated dilemmas we dealt with right in the beginning. And we went back to the client and we almost had a huge round table where we said, let's come up with some guardrails and tenets that would guide us in the process at a thinking level as well as at an execution level. So at a thinking level, we did align on, like I said, certain time frames, certain kinds of categories or automobiles we were looking at. But we also took a fundamental step to say, listen, the future is not just about what's going to happen. It's also what's happening right now, and it's also what's happened in the past. So the future was very much anchored in the present. The future was also not simply about reinventing the wheel. It was also looking at all of the local and global examples that exist, things that we know have worked, have not worked in the past, etc. And at an execution level, we definitely knew we had to rely on multiple data sources. It's not as simple to meet a bunch of consumers or to do ethnography on the streets of a Bangalore or a Mumbai, but we had to kind of go back and triangulate a lot of data with secondary sources, with facts that we know, speaking to many industry experts, not just linked to the automobile industry or the two-wheeler industry, but also people who work in urban planning, city development, people who are policymakers in the government sustainability EV initiative, journalists who worked in this space. So it was really, triangulating various sources, because commute, as much as it's a lived reality, also has various stakeholders and players. In terms of what we did, like I said, we did start out with, and why this really fundamentally is a part of steering, we did start out with those guardrails, and they really became our golden tenets in a lot of this, right? We knew the timeline we're looking at, we knew the kind of automobiles we were looking at, we knew we were looking at intercity and not intracity, for example. So those guardrails definitely helped us. And like I said, we did multiple sense-making sessions, we aligned, and it really became like our compass in the midst of the future, which appeared to be fairly complex and challenging. Post which we also looked at, like I said, multiple data sources, right? So not simply speaking to consumers alone, but triangulating a lot of data, and also constantly like fact checking, also being able to distinct fact versus fiction in this, because there's a lot of papers out there on what the future of commute could be. There's various lobbies that are involved in some of this as well. So we did kind of have to take a step back and constantly have a slightly more neutral stance. And like it wasn't challenging enough, and I think quantum loves certain challenges for sure, we tried to complicate it further to say, listen, urban commute, as broad a space as it is, has a lot of nuance. So what does it look like in, say, a metro versus a tier 1 or a T2? Or what does the future of commute look like, for a family versus, a single working professional or a migrant, men versus women, people who are passengers versus active commuters and are, have their own vehicles. So lots of these nuances kind of helped us. Also, again, embrace the reality that there could be multiple futures, and, the future of commute for me versus somebody else could fundamentally look and feel very different. We did come up with 8 different commute themes or scenarios for the future, and while I'm not at liberty to share some of the exact framings of it, happy to discuss, and the slide has a lot of the details around the 8 commuting realities or scenarios for the future that we imagine. Now, what we did with all of these scenarios, and while it was great at a storytelling level, how we presented the data became very important. We were speaking to a cross-functional client team, very heavy on product. So a lot of engineers who really wanted to say, Disha, tell us what to do. We understand the themes and the stories of it, but what can we actually do to be a part of these futures and to really fix the future in many ways? So we looked at it from a macro view and a micro view. So we kept fact checking, like I said, told them what's the big picture, but this is what's happening on ground. And one thing that really helped us was this fact versus feeling, aspect that we kept in mind. So factually, I can tell you Bangalore is pretty much the most congested city in the world, but you have to be in that Bellandur traffic, which is the meme on the extreme left, to know what that congestion really feels like. I could tell you ride-hailing services are making apps safer. As a single woman traveling, there are multiple SOS options, but you have to be in that cab late at night, possibly in Gurgaon, to know what that unsafety feels like. I could tell you commute is super tech savvy. Everything is hyper convenient and tech enabled. Try booking a cab in peak hours, in a Bombay or a Delhi. So that really helped, us as well as the client team understand these are the various futures, but what are the big emotional dilemmas or the big challenges we're really solving for? We further distilled each theme, like I said, into macro and micro, and then fundamentally came down to what is the biggest design challenge to solve for each theme. Again, as an example, if one big future of commute is about commute becoming far more aesthetic, luxurious, extremely stylish, how do we navigate the form versus function debate? Or if commute is really about being tech-enabled and tech-led, how do we navigate the biggest dilemma of human versus machine, given all of the Tesla news that's out in the world as well? So that really helped kind of distill it. And then we used a fairly intuitive but very heavy on decision-making framework to navigate all of these themes and spaces that came with, and what were our ideas. So what is helping us solve simply and possibly cope at one end, versus what are interventions that help us enhance quality of life and commute. At the other vector, we had how big of a jump is this into the future? Is it a small incremental obvious logical step that nobody seems to be taking, or is it a big leap into the future? Post which we also prioritized the spaces for the client based on their right to play and right to win, and a lot of this was done through joint stakeholder sessions, etc. And also the scale of the problem. So is it a large scale problem that everybody deals with, or is it a problem that's unique to a specific cohort or community, but it's fairly deep and extensive, and therefore there's enough that merits solving this problem. So that really helped us again prioritize and make choices, which was a huge part of this whole process, and also why we've put this under the steering bucket. And finally, I think after multiple rounds of conversations, some very healthy and unhealthy debates and discussions, we went into ultimately, even within the themes that were prioritized, what was really short-term, medium-term, long-term, and based on gut, which I've realized is a great way to also, stand your ground sometimes, but also a lot of fact. What is fact, fiction, and foresight when it comes to actually looking at what the future of commute could be? Yeah, I think The only other thing I think that's missed out here, but because I still have 55 seconds, I can maybe still talk about, is, and at the impact level of this, I think was really multiple fold, right? So as a research team that was doing this with a client team that had never done something like this, it opened us to the idea of having multiple futures, and the fact that my decision could be very different from yours, but these futures could exist in parallel. One could actively pitch to make one future happen versus the other. At a client level team, at a client level, what they've used a lot of these findings for is actually to kind of understand their innovation pipeline for the future. They're actively designing for certain cohorts. They're designing India-specific interventions, which is a great thing, simply because copying what developed nations do in the land of commute really is not something that works in India. At a personal level, I still don't know how to drive, and that'll hopefully not change given the future of commute that I'm betting on. But yeah, I think that's all we have. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have one question from the audience. Yes, Sonali. Yeah, ma'am.
Impact of self-drive vehicles on mobility? What will be the impact of self-drive vehicles on mobility? More in terms of, I guess, safety and...
Okay, so since this was future of commute in urban India, while we toyed with the idea of self-driven vehicles, there were enough and more government employees that we met who said it's a far cry from what's going to happen in the future. So from a study point of view, I can't really comment on that. From a personal point of view, we've all seen the very, very recent Tesla report that's come out on the rate of accidents. So I will only say
Any city in India or state in India which is very well equipped to do this?
so we in fact found very interesting for self-driven cars. I don't think I can answer that, simply because that wasn't part of the scope.
What about the electricity or the infrastructure when it comes to electric?
Yeah. So the electric vehicle question was an interesting one because it was one of the futures we spoke about, and that was part of our report as well. So there's a great push towards electric vehicles. There's also a lot of companies working in this space. They're not simply looking at it from a four-wheeler or a two-wheeler perspective. You've all seen the Yulu bikes, in Bangalore, etc. But from a governmental point of view, there's an active push, and it's part of many, SDG goals. So there's a lot that's happening in the electric vehicle space. It's also getting subsidized massively. So
one more question is coming. When we talk of mobility, Mumbai has its constraints based on its typical geography. It's a long question. The density of over 30 per square kilometer. Do we have any insights of future mobility in Mumbai?
for Mumbai specifically, I can cross-check and let you know. But similar to Mumbai, there's also Bangalore and there's also parts of Delhi where there is extremely high population density, and more than that, it's also density that's concentrated for certain areas. So for those who are familiar with Gurgaon, because that's where I've worked for a bit of in my life, you know the Cyber Hub stretch is going to be the stretch that kills you every morning. So it's not simply population density, but also are there ways to almost create solutions that deal with those chock-a-block spaces, and it's not simply a commute problem. So work from home, in fact, we found as a big trend that actually was helping with traffic management in an inadvertent way. Certain companies, and not all, had actually created different time slots for their employees to log in and log out, simply to kind of ease traffic. So it's not simply a commuting answer, it's got a lot to do with people, systems, organizations as well.
It's the second part of the question, which is, do we have any benchmarks for all states that can be adapted at the city level?
It's something that the client's looking to do now. It wasn't a part of this study, but they are looking at which cities or clusters are slightly more similar than dissimilar, and if they could implement things that are that follow a pattern here.
Any place in, like, which is the benchmark city or country in the world where this is being implemented?
So there is no A benchmark, simply because you can't compare, and a lot of the Western world actually should not even be considered to be a benchmark for India. We definitely looked at a lot of Southeast Asian countries. We looked at how, even cities like Bangkok have tried to manage, and I do want to say tried because traffic in most parts of Thailand is quite terrible as well. So there's no A benchmark, but we definitely found certain tier 1 and tier 2 cities in India, like a Kochi or an Indore, that have invested heavily into, certain traffic mechanisms, safety protocol. Chandigarh apparently has one of the highest traffic fine rates, but that's also because they are very particular about, fining and making those steps happen. So within clusters, again, there are various benchmarks, but no one's got it right, is also something I want to table. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.